I'm Greg Schneering, and today we continue the Track Media Chapter 2 interview with Ted Krichels, which focuses on his time at Penn State, specifically at WPSU TV and FM. Ted, you recorded a conversation with three of your colleagues from Penn State, and we're going to be including some clips from that conversation in our interview today. But Ted, could you talk just a little bit about that interview and the people that will be joining us via clips on this interview?
Sure. Well, there were three of them, Susan, Nate, and Melanie. You would see each of them. I worked with them. Susan was actually my neighbor. I didn't know that when I first met her, but we lived on a dirt road kind of in Boalsburg, right adjacent to State College, kind of this little bit funky road that went up into nowhere. And so lots of wild animals. And it turned out we were neighbors. We met at some social gathering in State College.
Well, Ted, I remember sitting out together on our deck. I don't know if you remember this. And we were talking about how it seems so important to bring the radio television station into the university research mission.
What we came up with, and she actually was the one who put it together, was a group of academics who met at our station. And we're just talking about issues and, ways of media and academia kind of melding together in ways. And it led to a specific project, which we called Lobby Talks, for lack of a more extravagant name. But essentially, it was an open community discussion that would feature typically academics with expertise in different areas, like autism. We had one that was very kind of overcrowded in attendance around the Amish, which are a big deal in Pennsylvania. Just a lot of different issues, and it kind of was inspiring, and it led to and played into the initiative we'll talk about a little later. I think the Engaging Faculty in a Digital Future, which we worked on with Wisconsin and Ohio State, and around just trying to get more engaged within the university. So that was Susan. Nate didn't work with us that long. I mean, I think it was probably 4 years or so a long enough period of time.
Well, Penn State Public Broadcasting was my first real job, honestly. So it was right out of I came to it through a former producer who was my film professor at Penn State when I was taking some courses there, and I was teaching at the local Friends School. This was right after graduating from college.
He was very much into alternative and creative media and using it in different ways. And he talks about that, and he kind of came in fresh, and he was just actually what I was looking for in the production area is somebody who just didn't paint inside the lines. He just kind of thought about it in a more creative sense, especially, outside of broadcast and how you could work. And he talks about a class he did with Iraqi war veterans, where they were telling their own stories and actually videotaping each other, telling them and putting it all together. And then some other projects we'll talk about, but just a wonderfully creative guy who went on to work at Frontline with WGBH and then with public radio in Minneapolis. And then finally, Melanie Dobler, who came on fairly early, I'd say a couple of years into my kind of working at Penn State.
Ted, I remember seeing you do pledge for Beyond Stonewall. And I looked at you and thought, I like this guy. Like, where did he come from? And then figured out you came from Colorado. And I was like, of course, like he's not from here.
Just had a vision that we shared about that engagement again, and was really the one who spearheaded some of these larger projects. And you've seen a few of them, and we'll talk about them in a little bit as we go on. But just projects that dealt with, I think, important or developing issues, and did it in a way that both used media, but then kind of extended it into what are, how do you engage with this in communities? So she was just somebody that it just was tremendously kind of inspiring to have her and work with her because we were on the same wavelength. And so those are the three. When you see them, you'll know that they're people that I specifically wanted to talk to in advance of these discussions because they were, in their own ways, major players at Penn State when I was there.
Well, it was a very interesting conversation that the four of you had. But I want to take you back now to 1999. You've had a very successful career at KBDI, and but you decide to make a career move. How did that come about?
Well, partly coincidence, partly, I don't want to use the stereotypical midlife crisis, but, I'd been there a long time. I was at KBDI for about 20 years or so. And, a lot of things I loved about it. It was a role I was comfortable in. And, it just felt, I think, that if I was going to make a change, I needed to do it at some point. And I think KBDI, it was always going to be struggling. I mean, it didn't have the typical resources. It was a smaller station in an overlap market. So we couldn't rely on the core PBS audience as much. So it was kind of, I felt like had kind of done what I could do, I guess. And at the same time, I was at that point the chair of the Pacific Mountain Network. I don't know if you remember, there was PMM and SICA, and I forget the one in the north, but regional networks of television stations. And PMN was ramping down and about to go out of business. But I was the chair that was taking it out. And we hired Ron Bornstein to be the business manager, kind of a part-time thing. And so I was dealing directly with him on different issues around PMN, and he brought up this job search. And I had not thought about Penn State. I went to University of Pennsylvania, so we always, had that Ivy League arrogance about any state universities. But he's a very compelling guy, if you remember.
I do.
So I just said, sure, I'll apply. And I didn't know that if applying, I would actually take the job or any of that. But he has a very intensive search process that he does. It's a little bit frightening. I don't know if I'd ever want to go through it again. But through all of that, I was the selected candidate. And I think it just felt like that was the time to do it. So I decided to leave KBDI. It was, kind of bittersweet. This was a heavy deal. We had two young children, when we loved Colorado. And so it definitely was a traumatic moment for our family. And, launching everybody, getting everybody in the car and all of our stuff, and we're driving across country, and I know you're in the Midwest, and I love the Midwest, but driving on those highways, it gets pretty dreary, and we were just driving relentlessly across the Midwest, and we came into Western Pennsylvania, and I remember, I don't know if my wife actually started crying, but the western part of Pennsylvania it's not exactly billboard material. And so it just felt like, I think it was raining at the time, and it felt kind of, well, here we are. And we had bought a house almost unseen. We saw it from the outside, like it was an old stone house in downtown. And we just kind of settled in. And so that was kind of the beginning of just moving there and having my family. My kids were young enough that I think it was an adventure at some point. So they were not as traumatized as I think Pat, my wife, was at that point. I don't blame her. I bought her a light lamp to make up for the lack of sunlight in Happy Valley.
So you arrive in Happy Valley, you have the house, and you had some interesting first experiences at the university. So can you tell us about those, and also a bit about your first impressions of WPSU and Penn State?
Well, I mean, it felt like it was almost the day after I got there. There was a retreat of the outreach, overall outreach department. And outreach included Penn State. It was that was the name of the department. And it included continuing education, distance education, Will Campus, cooperative extension, and then some smaller like media, publicity, and Penn State public broadcasting. So 4 pretty distinct units. And the head of the executive VP at that time was an Irish guy, Jim Ryan, very kind of outgoing and, in some way a stereotypical as you think about Irish, hale, hearty, always ready for the next challenge. And, a little intimidating as a guy, friendly, but kind of in that friendly, intimidating way. So there was a retreat scheduled at this retreat place on, I think it was Racedown Lake. And I think it's a man-made lake. And so we went, everybody trucked down there. And I was rooming with him. I think he probably thought that was a good way to break in a new person. And so I have this really talkative out there guy, and I'm kind of trying to figure out where the hell I am. And then we had about 20, 25 people in the outreach kind of leadership group. And it was a kind of a weird experience. I mean, it was all alien to me. I mean, I knew public media, but I didn't know all these other departments, and it felt kind of bureaucratic. And they did, I don't know if you know Myers-Briggs, like that personality test. And this was outreach, right? So everybody's like, yay, yay. And out of the 25 people, when you go through it, you're E or you're an I. So if you're E, you self-defined as the extrovert, and I, you're self-defined as an introvert. And I did it as best I could, but I came out as an I. And literally, there was one other person somewhere in there. There was one other person. Everybody else, and I know they were not all E's, but this was outreach, and damn it, they were going to be E's. And so I felt a little like a fish out of water, to put it mildly. So that was my kind of introduction to here I am, and this is my new peer group. And as I said, they were nice people. It just we didn't have a firm base of kind of communication. I put it that way. So that was it. And then we were in this old building. We eventually moved, but it's this old building in the center of campus, the Wagner building. And we were co-located with ROTC. So you had basically us and the military kind of folks. They all were quite nice, but they were, again, it was totally separate worlds. There was nothing we had to, do together or talk to or any of that. You just see them in the bathrooms and the hallways and stuff. And Bornstein had done an environmental scan, and I didn't pay a lot of attention to it. I looked at it in preparation for this, but he had some good things in there. It was basically challenges. There's not a lot of diversity in central Pennsylvania, at least in terms of ethnic diversity. There's the university bureaucracy. There's a conflict, which I'm sure you might have had in Madison, with the kind of the fundraising and who you can approach or not approach. You have to kind of different things that have to be cycled through a university bureaucracy. And I started calling the university bureaucracy, these folks, Burkats. Because they were friendly but tenacious, I would say. And it was a new kind of area that it was not something I was very patient with, and I had to kind of learn how to work with it. Some of the challenges Ron talked about were, there were folks who had been there for their whole lives, and they were good. I mean, they were nice folks.
Mm-hmm.
They've been doing what they've been doing the same way for 20, 30 years. And they weren't going to change. I mean, they were, they were competent in what they were doing. They thought it was the way to do public media. And, we got along okay, but they were not the people in my mind that were going to kind of shake anything up and stuff. And so it was kind of, how do you work with that? And I think that's, Ron laid out some of that, but he also laid out some of the positive attributes. You've got a large
Right.
university with amazing resources. There's a lot of potential and all of that. So it wasn't a negative overview he did at all. He just laid out both, the typical kind of thing you do when you do that kind of analysis. So anyhow, so that was my first experience and kind of getting exposed with staff. Was about I think it was 100 people at that time, which
Much larger than KBDI.
Yeah, KBDI was about 25 to 30, and this was like 100, and it had, the technical side was union, which I had never worked with before either, which was a mixed blessing. And so it was just different, a lot more people, and not really. I think we did fairly early on, we did I kind of led a retreat, sort of a business retreat. It was just like looking at the resources, where the money was coming from. Because you always want to know where that is when you're working with an organization. And, there was a lot of pride in kind of membership activity and underwriting, because staff there, that was their jobs. And there was a lot of kind of thinking of how important that was. But when you actually looked at it, the money was Penn State. There was the money that we got from them, just direct kind of subsidy. And then we also did a lot of contract work, especially on the sports side. And we had a rate card, and that was very lucrative for us. And we got a state funding that was good. But the money, very totally opposite of KBDI. KBDI, you made it. If you didn't make the money, late strides or underwriting, you didn't make payroll. And this was kind of like, you could get a few calls sometimes on a program, or you do your best, but it's a large rural area. And, unless you're doing one of the local shows, Our Town, for example, which it was a series I think originated with Penn State. It's done at different places around the country, but kind of focusing on individual towns in rural Pennsylvania. And that town would always pledge. But other than that, it was very hard to raise a lot of money. So I think those kinds of things were just, I had to adjust to. Way larger staff, totally different kind of budget. And working with the large university. So it was.
There was also a state authority too, that it wasn't there.
Yes, there was a state authority that basically was the go-between for the funding from the state, that didn't really have any authority, but kind of, you had to deal with as well. Yeah.
But primarily you were dealing with the university.
Yes, yeah. And just kind of learning what that was all about was, and initially it was kind of, people were very supportive, and so it was more my just trying to understand where the possibilities were. And there were a couple of things that were kind of immediately, like, I probably should have paid some attention to. It really, one that stood out when I think back on it. And there was a protest within, I think, the first week or so of my actually being on the job. And it was a Black student union group that was protesting against, perceived discrimination. And they were meeting around the student union building. And our radio reporter, who was very good, very kind of, I think she was from Chicago or something, but she was kind of on it, and she was covering it. And I got a call from a VP of outreach, and he started the call, I think, with, "Ted, I would never tell you what to do." Which, if you ever get that as the first line of a call, be very, very careful.
Yes.
And he just went in about how it was being misunderstood, what actually happened. He was a little concerned about the reporter because he seemed to be looking for the negative angle on this and stuff. And it was all, and he just went on for about 10 minutes, but was definitely not telling me what to do. And there was the other one that, it wasn't really, it was just happened to be going on. It was a big panic. I don't know if it was at other universities, and that was the Y2K. And we even had some guy whose total job was trying to figure out what the disruptions were going to be and how we could deal with it and all of this. And so there was a period of time where that was like front and center for the university, certainly. And I mean, it turned out to be,
Yes.
I guess, a nothing burger, and it wasn't an issue, but there was a period of time, I don't know when that, probably a month or two, that it just was kind of the cloud that everybody was waiting to see what would happen. So
Yeah, it was I'm not sure if we would have done nothing regarding Y2K if, we would have had no problems, but a lot of planning and effort went into it, at your university, at the university that I was at. And, maybe some of that work really paid off in the end.
yeah, no, I think that's a good point, that I wasn't involved in it. All I was kind of a bystander in it, because I was too new to be really thinking about it. And it really was more on the university side at this point. But so you're right, it may be that that it was avoided, not that it didn't happen.
Right, exactly. So you talked about outreach, but I wanted to talk a bit more about it and maybe make a little bit of a distinction. So outreach to the community was something that was very important to public television stations all across the country in the years that we're talking about. Later, community engagement would evolve out of outreach efforts. But again, for you, outreach was a department within the university, and that you reported to. And I want to get some more of your comments about that. But let's hear a clip from Melanie talking about that.
I started working for Penn State Outreach, which included kind of, public WPSU under its umbrella, and met Tom Kiter. And after I involved him in a project that I had, and WPSU hadn't been involved in a lot of these like cross-functional team projects. And so I was trying to pull you in or pull us in from that perspective, and got Tom involved. And then I met you. Yeah, we were on some cross-functional committee for outreach.
One of those positive coincidences. I mean, I actually met her the night after we had pledged a program on gay issues, after Stonewall. And it wasn't anything like the Tongues Untied that I talked about with KBDI, but it was a kind of program that people could get upset about or whatever. And it went all right. It was not, if you we would pledge a show like that in Denver, Colorado, you'd get a lot of activity and all of this. And this was central Pennsylvania. So, but we got some calls. But Melanie had seen it. And I think she was, in a good way, like, thought, wow, something's going on there. And so I saw her the next day, I think, at the outreach building, and we just started talking.
And I remember very clearly you calling me and saying, hey, I just have a question to run by you. We need someone who's bilingual over here. And I said, that would not be me. And and you said, no, we need someone who speaks academe. We've got this new project coming in called Engaging Faculty in a Digital Future. And I need someone who knows the academic side of the house.
I don't know. I still don't get how the university works in some way, but you basically can take an employee from another. Within outreach, everything's fungible.
Yes,
So
yes.
it's fungible over to us.
Programming is what we're all about, so it's front and center. And WPSU had quite a few local programs that really complemented the national schedule.
Yes, and they were in some cases programs that had been on for a very long time. Weather World, Penn State was notorious. Notorious isn't the right word, but was, you know, had a very strong reputation as in meteorology, and there was a nightly weather program that, unless you were a weather weenie, could be deadly dull, but it was a very, very in depth, more than you would ever know about what was going to happen in Happy Valley and throughout Pennsylvania and maybe the world. So that was on 5 nights a week and had probably been on since the Stone Age. So that was there. We did Take Note, which is a very nice show. Patty Satalia was a great interviewer, actually, and she would get guests from all around.
Bankruptcy has doubled in the last 10 years. 1 million Americans file for bankruptcy every year. You have some solutions to prevent that, because bankruptcy ultimately hurts all of us.
Yes, it does, and it stays on your credit report for about 10 years.
A lot of folks might be visiting the university or academics at the university. It was just a kind of a talking, an interview program that it was on a regular basis. We did, as I mentioned, lots of sports. We didn't do the live football, but we did live women's basketball. I remember, pledging courtside during the, halftime and the stuff, and that was kind of a blast. We did a coaches show, with Paterno and his successors. Did a lot of gymnastics, a lot of wrestling, and sports was a big deal at Penn State.
We bring the spirit of Penn State to the community and share the story of student athletes.
I love whatever event I win, so.
Monroe with the ball to Kim Gissendanner to the bottom of the net.
This all changed over a period of time as the Big Ten Network came in and sports became increasingly big business. And so that work kind of at some point got taken away to a large degree. And the sports, athletic department built their own studios and everything. I mean, it's such a humongous business at this point. But
well, it certainly is, especially at Penn State and the other Big Ten schools. I want to ask you about the sports programming, because I produced the home University of South Dakota Coyote football games for a couple of years. I had a blast at, but a lot of stations did not. A lot of public radio and public television stations didn't embrace sports programming the way that you did. Can you talk a little bit more about that, about the sports programming?
Sure. Well, you're right that a lot didn't. I think Connecticut had a major deal with women's basketball that was very lucrative for them over the years. I know Nebraska and South Dakota did a lot with high school sports. It was also very successful. I mean, this was existing when I got there, and it was just, we had a very skilled production staff on the sports side. I mean, they would do freelance work for ESPN and others, during the off seasons. So it was a long-term relationship, basically, between athletics and public broadcasting. So it was, and as I said, the sports, especially football, we'll come back to this maybe later on when things blew up, but
right,
was, I think it's true at a lot of big, land grant or large state universities that athletics, are a big deal, way bigger than just like people watching it. I mean, the fundraising around it, the uh, places we have board members elected to the board, often they are, athletic kind of inclined, very into the, football especially, but also basketball and some of the others. And the money, I mean, I remember it was a Gordon Gee, who used to be at Ohio State, it was actually at Colorado, was quoted once as saying, when I go to a football game, I see my fortunes of the university going up and down the field. So it's out of control in my mind at this point in time. But even then it was a big deal.
Well, it certainly was, and Coach Paterno, was probably the most recognized college coach, maybe in history, and we'll get to that. I wanted to ask about Richard Alley and geology in the national park. That was another one of your programs.
Yeah, that was the first one. I mean, we had these local shows that were just ongoing. There was also Scholastic Scrimmage, I should mention, was a high school quiz show, but that, as the educational kind of business model fell apart with other competing services that came in, that kind of disintegrated, slowly kind of fell apart. But what we were trying to do is trying to find academics that would be interesting and get interesting material and interesting programs. And Richard Alley was just this charismatic, kind of looked like an elf. He was in geology. He's a great teacher, just very colorful. He actually sang. He did all kinds of stuff. So we accompanied him and students. We had a crew that went with him to national parks, I think in the Southwest. And it was like I think it was a half-hour program that we put together. And it was an experiment in a way. We didn't have any funding for it, but it was kind of, this was after we had Tom Kiter, who was a really excellent producer, who had come on board. And so he was the lead director on this. And they just came back with this wonderful footage. And it kind of was proving a point about how we could take academically based material and make it into something that could reach much broader audiences. So I was looking for a clip of it. I don't know if we have it, but if you see it, you'd understand what I'm saying.
We have it, and we'll watch it now.
Yellowstone is out there in the canyon grand. Redwoods grow out bugle in the fall. Here's your guided tour across this mighty land, and if you pay and play, there's credit for it all. Geosci attendance wide semester is gonna be worth all of that cash. But if you think that we stink, just remember, with your big job, you can buy us in a flash. Now you know, so now you're set to go.
Yeah.
Another one of the programs you had was a program that was called To the Best of My Knowledge. In Wisconsin, we produced a program, and they still do, called To the Best of Our Knowledge. But tell us about To the Best of My Knowledge.
Well, this existed as a radio program when I got there, and it was hosted by the president of the university, Graham Spanier, who actually, fortunately for us, really liked public media and was very into it. And he had a show, and he was interested in it being on TV. And so I was okay with that. I mean, it was one of those ones where you kind of say, well, you got the president of the university. Is that really kind of editorially sound? And are you doing it just because he's that? And a little bit of all of that, I guess. But he was a very smart guy. I wouldn't say he was a charismatic TV personality, but he was a smart guy, and he got great guests. And it was good for university relations. So it wasn't like a happy talk. He was not a happy talk guy. So yeah, we did a radio and TV for, until he got fired. which we'll come to.
Well, we will. Being in rural Wisconsin is, you know, in Wisconsin, like Pennsylvania is, you know, largely rural in nature. And so there were a lot of references to silos. And that the connotation was that you shouldn't be in a silo. You should work across departments. You should partner within the university, which we've already talked about some, but also partner outside of the university and of a WPSU. So can you talk a bit about those outside partnerships that you had?
Well, I maybe talk a little bit first about some of the initiatives that were meant to kind of encourage that. So there was one project that I inherited that had happened already. It was called Partners in Public Service, and that was collaboration with libraries, museums and libraries around the country. And we, I think my predecessor, Mark Ersling, had started this, and they'd had a conference, I think in Bethesda. And we did a follow-up conference at Penn State. And we got other universities, a lot of people who came to the conference from public media. And it was really, you know, about partnering and how to work better, you know, and museums, libraries especially are like, and even today, way more so, because they're really into multimedia and all of this and natural, seemingly partners. So we worked with that initiative. And then we started the Engaging Faculty in a Digital Future, and that was one that Byron Knight from Wisconsin was one of my, Byron, I should say, was probably one of my favorite people in public media. I mean, and I got to know him when I was at KBDI, when I was a little bit, I wouldn't say an outcast, but I was definitely not a kind of good old boy in public media. And he was one of the first folks who just basically we just bonded and it kind of developed. And when I went to Penn State, we kind of said we're going to work together, and we did really well. And so we started, you know, the Engaging Faculty was really kind of playing off some of the work that Susan had done, and it just, you know, we had conferences at Penn State, we had one in Wisconsin, and it was just trying to elaborate on that and how that could work and how we could develop it, and showing different samples and bringing other university licensees into it. But again, the idea of extending the university and doing that with public media as a natural partner. So that was the overall concept for it.
And Susan talked about one of the conferences at Ohio State, and we'll catch that clip now.
A bunch of us later driving to the conference in Ohio State, which was what was it? It was the outreach conference, maybe. And Melanie, you were in the car, maybe you were even driving, I can't remember. And we gave a paper together, and we had fellows through the Science, Technology, and Society program, and some of them have gone on from strength to strength, most particularly Greg Agigian. You remember Greg? He was so good on the TV. He has a book coming out now with Oxford that's called When the Flying Saucers Came, and he was the Lindbergh Fellow at the Smithsonian. What a title, Lindbergh Fellow, and now he's going to be at Princeton in the Davis Center.
You've mentioned Byron. You worked with Byron not only on the things that you were just talking about, but also you co-founded the University Licensee Association with Byron, and he was the first chair. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah. Actually, I think I might have been the first chair, but he was the one who had the inspiration. I mean, he was the one who kind of approached me about, we ought to do this. There were other affinity groups, and there was not at that time a university affinity group in public media. So we found it. I think we had up to 40 members or so. I mean, I think there were like 50 across the country of university licensees. It's a pretty substantial group. So that was, I had gotten into the affinity groups actually fairly early on with, KBDI is, I think, working with the Small Station Association, and then taking on the ULA, and then I also became chair of the Joint Licensee Association, and then chair of the overall AGC. But yeah, Byron's the one who really, he just had some visions, and in some cases, things that kind of shone a light for me about how to proceed. And he understood universities obviously way better than I did. So he was a mentor, I would say, as well as a friend for trying to figure out some of these things.
One of the things about Byron that you mentioned, and I saw it play out, is that he was really good at kind of bridging between the university bureaucracy and also the public media stations. He did an extraordinary job regarding that. So ULA, University Licensee Association, the Affinity Group Coalition, all of those played a very big role in public television. And, you were involved in all of them.
Yes, you could argue about how big a role it played, but I think I was involved back before, when it was called the Forum, actually. I think before it even became the Affinity Group Coalition. And the concept, which makes total sense and has never really happened, is that the station community needs to be much more kind of united around issues. And right now it's basically defers to CPB, PBS, NPR, that it doesn't really, especially on the TV side. I think SRG, at least with Tom Thomas, had more of this role, but on the TV side, the stations were just fragmented and were not really establishing what their kind of needs were, or thinking about it, or communicating about it. So it was intended to kind of bring that together, that thinking together. And I think it worked in that it's a sounding board, that the stations came together. I don't think it works so well in terms of, affecting any kind of significant change in the system.
So let's move back to talking a little bit about programming, because there are a few more programs that I want to get your take on. And one of them is Lobby Talks. And Susan has a comment about that let's watch now.
There would be several people on the topic in a panel from different parts of the university or from different parts of the community. And they would each give talks, and there would be a moderator. Greg Agigian was one hell of a good moderator, as I remember. And then there would be people in the audience who would line up and ask questions, and it would just go on. It was really an exciting thing.
To me, it makes my life interesting to be curious about the world and learn all I can. When I heard about the Lobby Talks, I bicycled over and it made a wonderful experience. And I found out that they have talks about fascinating subjects. Somebody like Maeve Leakey, she's pushed the knowledge of human origins back by millions of years. And to be able to ask her a question was a marvelous experience for me. I'm Dick Tabor, and WPSU is my source for programs that stimulate and challenge me.
It's real important. It was not so much in the audience that it got, because it was a local program in a way. It was more the active engagement with faculty and around issues that were like socially relevant issues, I would say. And so the act of doing that, I mean, that group that we pulled together would kind of agree on what topics, and some of them would host the programs, and they were quite good. I mean, this was a really smart group of folks. And it just would bring in, I mean, it was open to the community. And I know there was one that was a Quaker assisted living place, which was, you know, it was just one, I mean, they would show up with a bus, you know, and very active and engaged and stuff. And so it was just it felt good to do them and to see all the people. And I said, you know, if you're in Colorado and you do something like that, you can, you know, it might be a little humdrum, but this is Central PA. So having something that kind of brought people together was the best you could. And yeah, I need to say, I think I've said it before, but the coverage area of Penn State public broadcasting was enormous. I mean, it covered a
Yes.
lot, and we'll talk about it a little bit when we talk about
Yeah.
trying to deal with like political issues and things. But it was, you know, I forget the actual mileage, but you know, you could drive for hours and be in our coverage area, and very different kind of congressional districts, very different types of towns, and all of this. It's all rural. But it very, you know, it wasn't like you had a population. You had State College, which wasn't that big. I think 40,000, except when students were there. So it was a much bigger challenge. You know.
So you had repeater transmitters located at various places around the state.
Yes, yes,
Yeah.
or around Central PA.
So there's a program that Nate talks about. Let's hear from him on the Veterans Project.
I was at the Public Service Media Group and met an oral historian, Shirley Moody, who and we just got brainstorming and came up with an idea for CPB on doing a documentary film class for Iraq and Afghanistan veterans through Penn State Public Broadcasting that would also be a course. And then we made a whole multimedia project about it. I wish we had the time to make a whole documentary because it really was extraordinary. I'd say it's probably the media project I'm most proud of in my career. Really, I mean, it was so special to spend that time with those veterans. And I got this group of veterans together, and over the course of a semester, they told their stories to each other, many of whom had never shared their stories with anybody, you know, and they felt safe to do that.
More American servicemen and women will have their lives.
The story of the Iraq War is usually told by pundits and politicians.
4,500 Americans have died. Has it been worth that? I think so.
But where are the veterans? This past spring, a Penn State professor and a WPSU producer teamed up to help student veterans of the Iraq War become its storytellers. Now, see what they filmed. Hear the stories they told.
They were firing mortars upon us.
And join the conversation by sharing your own experiences of coming back from Iraq.
For me, what was so good about it was he found a really good professor. You know, I think he met her through our academic group that Susan had put together. And he co-taught a class, and it brought in, you know, I think it was Iraqi and Afghanistan veterans, and they told their own story, and they actually did their own videotaping. And it was all on, you know, it was available mostly online. So that it was, again, what Nate did, and we have a few other examples we should talk about, but he was really looking beyond broadcast at a time. Beyond broadcast, but also at radio and television as two, you know, part of a broader landscape. And so what he was doing was, whether he knew it or not, he was breaking into new territory before a lot of others were even thinking about it.
For a university-based station that gathers news, disseminates news, there is a document and a website that you had a lot to do with as the chair, and Tom Thomas and Byron Knight were involved. But it's the Editorial Integrity for Public Media site. Tell us about the work that was done there, and then I'm going to have a few follow-up questions.
Okay. Well, this would have been in, trying to look at the dates where this actually happened, but it just somewhere in that late 2008, I think, around
Yeah.
that. But and this again, where things were changing and in the media landscape, and so I think with Facebook and social media starting to come on, and there was a growing sense that the system needed to have common editorial standards that should be arrived at through consensus. So this was something that was funded by CPB, that we, got Tom Thomas and Byron to be the co-directors of it. I was chair. That we had an oversight board, might have been the AGC group, but that was, I was chairing, and we did a lot of meetings, different things around the country, and basically trying to put together an agreed upon set of editorial standards. And the idea was that every station would kind of be able to. David, we see you there. It's a nice belly. It's a so we it was meant to be kind of ground up to develop these standards that people could then adopt. They didn't have, you couldn't mandate it, but that we would have a kind of common set of standards. And it was prompted, I think I mentioned in that last program, one of Byron's great stories is when they were doing a debate, and the Republican candidate pulled into the parking lot and saw all these cars with the bumper sticker for the Democrat, and kind of it's kind of pushed the question, and this gets on social media as well, is when your employees are advocates or expressing opinions, what does that do? And where is the line drawn between your personal kind of right to your own opinions and your professional? I mean, pretty obvious stuff, but when you're in this business, you've got to be thinking about it consciously. And there had not been a lot of thinking about that. So it was a really good effort, and Tom and Byron did a great job on the radio and TV side. There was a report, and there's still been updated, but it's still an ongoing initiative.
It is.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I really
let me-
enjoyed being part of it. I think we talk maybe a little bit later when we get into some of the challenges at Penn State. That was, I think, having that kind of in my brain was very, in my view, helpful. May not have been helpful for my being at Penn State, but it was very helpful.
So these were a series of principles, and the idea was that not only would the station adopt those, but also the licensees would adopt them as well. Am I right about that?
Yes, yes. And that's a tough call. If you're a state licensee or a university licensee, I think just getting them even to pay attention to it. But I think the idea was that, yes, you should get your licensee to sign off on that. And that was, I think, one of my failures. I was not able to get. It wasn't so much that it was rejected, it's just they were too busy with other stuff.
November of 2011. There's breaking news out of Penn State. And it's not good news. It's a scandal of major proportions. Would you address that scandal as it relates to editorial integrity and what you faced during that crisis time?
Oh, yes. Let me start back just a little bit. I think I mentioned that the university was seemingly getting increasingly closed anyhow. I mean, that there was a sense of kind of just a very tight circle and don't rock the boat kind of thing. And there was also within outreach, the department I was part of under the new vice president, this concept of one outreach, which used to be very clear. We were public broadcasting, we were proud of outreach, but we were public broadcasting. And now it was kind of all for one, and you've got to help everybody else. And Distance Ed World Campus was the big moneymaker, so we needed to be more supportive of them. And it just got very mushy, frankly. And and I personally was more kind of looked at as maybe not playing along, not as enthusiastic, I would say, a participant, because I was very concerned about losing, what I thought was the integrity of what we were trying to do. So that was underway anyhow. And when the Sandusky scandal broke, I mean, one, it is hard to describe. I know it was a big national issue, no doubt about it, but it was way more than that in central Pennsylvania and at the university. It was like your patron saint had just been caught in the bathroom doing something bad. I mean, Joe Paterno was more than a football coach. He really was kind of on a pedestal. There was a statue of him that had to be taken down, and it caused major turmoil. The university, and we talked a little bit about this earlier, the financial impact of football in the university was tremendous, and especially with the beginning of the Big Ten network. I mean, it's only grown today. I mean, it is, we're talking lots and lots of money involved here. So this whole kind of thing was threatened by this. So you had a university also basically just traumatized. They were, and when I say university, I mean the people, academics, everybody was just like, you had not only Sandusky being accused of these incredibly serious child abuse, sexual child abuse, you had apparently a cover-up with Joe Paterno, with involving the president of the university, who was one of the most powerful presidents in the country of a university. He was the instigator behind the Big Ten and all of that. So it was it's just hard to overstate what a shock it was to the overall system. So that kind of came out of the blue and happened. And that was when we were, this is, again, I'm public media, so it was what do we do? And there were two stories. I don't know if I've told them already. I mean, one that was very disconcerting. I think it was the day after, or the Monday after Paterno was fired and Spania was fired. I should also say the athletic director and business manager were also gone. That there was a meeting in the studio control of the station, that the acting president of the university was there, and the kind of chief kind of PR people were there with him, and I was there. And there was all about the strategy for where this new president should go right now. This was his first day, on the job, and to walking through campus, and just the kind of almost absurdity of where he couldn't walk. You can't go by the sports facility, and maybe you can go by the library, but no, that's the Paterno library. You can't go there. And this whole kind of thing, and I'm standing there. I didn't say a word, I don't think, in the whole meeting, but it was just strikingly hitting me. They think I'm one of them. And maybe I am one of them, but I'm not one of them. And, that kind of, you have an identity, one of those moments where you say, what am I in this mix? I'm public broadcasting. We have our own editorial standards, and yet I'm here as part of a PR thing. There was a glaring kind of contradiction for me. So
but you go ahead.
Well, I was going to say, so out of that, I mean, even before that, I think we decided we're going to do a live call-in program on child sexual abuse, and get a panel together, and it's timely, obviously. And so I went to the then, my supervisor, the head of outreach, the executive VP, and told him what we were planning to do. And he just looked at me and said, "What are you going to do if they tell you can't do it?" So you kind of a number of things going on there that I knew, and I knew this beforehand, that this was not somebody who was going to ever stand up for me in anything. Even when we got along, he was just not somebody who did that. And that you had, they presumably was the board of trustees who were kind of in charge at that point, but it was kind of an amorphous they. So we did the program. It was a good program. I mean, very talking, it was a call-in program, radio and TV. But it just was I think, stark reminder of what was going on at that time, and that I was in very kind of tentative territory.
But they didn't tell you not to air it.
No, we did another. There was a few different points in my history. There was one time, I don't know if you remember, This American Life did a whole show on the number one party school in the country.
Yes.
And Penn State was number one, and legitimately, justifiably so. And it was a great program, and it pulled no punches. And you could tell the university was really kind of on edge about that. And we aired the program, and then we did a follow-up live program. We got the head of student activities to come on, who was actually quite good. But it was I got nothing. I mean, it wasn't like this would be typically what would happen is nobody would call me up and say, what the heck are you doing? Yeah, they just wouldn't do anything. Nobody would say, good job. Hey, that was interesting. It was just silence. And that would be typically what would happen would be I called it eventually the shunning. You just kind of looked at as, you're not one of us, kind of. So anyhow, this would have been a shunning example.
So, almost everybody who's a general manager or head of a public television or public radio station goes through controversy at some point during their time at a station. And one of the things that I became to realize is that, in a way that's good because people are really passionate about public broadcasting. It means something to them. And so you're going to go through periods like that. But do you have advice for station leaders of today as to how to deal with a crisis like that when the principles of editorial integrity are at stake?
Well, I should say, I mean, you're right that managers go through it. And I certainly went through a number of those at KBDI. I think the difference was I was in charge, and I had a board that, even if there were some board members who might have had an issue, were never kind of against me. They were always behind me. So that very significant difference in being in an environment where you're not actually fully in charge. So it's very challenging for, I think, state and university licensees. And they vary, the relationship varies, and how you manage it. As I keep mentioning St. Byron, but Byron's Knight probably managed it as well as anybody I'd know. But very few places get hit with the kind of crisis that Penn State got hit with. So,
that was extraordinary. That was an extraordinary crisis.
So, and there was the other part, again, we talked about it on the interview show, so I don't want to necessarily repeat stuff, but Melanie and I kind of talked about, what if we did a total open approach? What if, we got faculty and administrators to talk openly on camera about how they felt, that it was basically like a truth and reconciliation kind of a thing. Mm-hmm. The way to deal with trauma is to deal with trauma, to talk about it, how people felt and what they were going through. That this would be it's an unusual situation, it's a crisis. This would be a way to kind of deal with it openly. And I think, looking back, there was no way the university would ever do that. So it's unrealistic. But if you think about it, I mean, what they did was essentially to hire lawyers and, hire a really good football coach. That was probably the number one thing, is make sure we have a winning team next year. So, but I I don't know. I don't know if I have advice for anybody in that kind of situation other than to keep paddling, because there is no easy way, and a lot of it depends on who your immediate supervisor or who's overseeing, whether it's the provost or the president or head of a department or the dean of a college. It's that relationship that probably matters more than anything. So I would say to cultivate that. And then, you're in a situation that you've got to make choices. So I think it was good for me in retrospect that I'd been through all the editorial process. So I felt like, I had something behind me. It wasn't necessarily at the university, but I felt in my own mind that I was doing what I should be doing. And I guess at the end of the day, that's the best you can do. So, but I wish I had a formula. There's no formula. There's no.
A programming matter that I found to be very powerful, and that is telling Amy's story, raising awareness regarding domestic violence. That was a powerful docudrama.
Yeah, that was one of the programs, and I think Melanie talks about the project, the overall goal of the work she was doing, and she did that with liquid assets and some other programs as well. But Amy's story was probably the one that was the most it was the most viewed. It was seen around the country.
The ending of her life is the beginning. At that moment, the process starts, and we build backwards. And we're trying to fill in what was happening right before that death. And then what was happening right before that. And right before that.
But it brought together all the elements that we had talked about. You had the academic connection in terms of dealing with abuse, child abuse. You had the importance of the issue. It's obviously a very significant issue, how to deal with that. And then you had a story that Joe Myers put together wonderfully well. I mean, just it's a very powerful program. And so when we released the program, and then we also had our alliances with different community entities. So if someone is feeling endangered or feeling threatened, where you can go for support and help. It would be, in my mind, something that was important, a critically important issue, and dealt with really well. And I think I would agree with Melanie in terms of being very proud of the program. And I think I don't know if it's still being used today, but it is certainly a program that holds up very well.
Let's hear from Melanie on her comments regarding telling Amy's story.
I still get notes from women who say, you helped me leave you helped me leave a potentially really bad situation. And that was in 2010. And that was with Verizon. And pretty much they funded, but they funded it a little bit at a time. So we had to learn how to build that project as we flew it.
If I bring up the name Sam Richards, and you can't say that, tell me about Sam.
Sam Richards was a lecturer, professor in the sociology department. He was voted, I think, more than 1 year, definitely over the years, as the most popular lecturer at Penn State by the students. I think academics might have found him a little too compelling, but he taught a class on racism, and it was a very unusual class. He's a very dynamic performer. We'll see a clip of him, I think, here.
Yes, we will.
but we wanted to do a series with him, and we thought it would be a series that would be, it would be controversial in a way, but also would be, this was when Obama was first running for president too. So the issue of race was very much, it's always been a very critical issue. And his way of dealing with it was just, I mean, it could be hilarious, it could be very uncomfortable, but he just had a way that was both entertaining and very challenging. So we did a prototype, we did a pilot, and we had put together a budget to do a series. And, you know, the way budgeting works, and I don't want to get too into the weeds on this, but, you know, we had a budget, but it did not involve a lot of out-of-pocket expenses. Most of the expenses were personnel that were on staff. And, you know, they were going to be on staff whether or not you do the project. And they're going to be doing other things that might generate revenue or not, but that's what they're there. So we
can't pay them twice, in other words, you know,
yeah,
because they're already
it's our budget. And so it was this time, again, the one outreach, and I was becoming increasingly suspect for stuff we've talked about. And this was a project I really wanted to see happen. And we had now started to have a budget guy from central administration and outreach come to our budget meetings, supposedly to offer advice or whatever. He was sort of a guy, I think he came from mid-level IBM business management or something. And so it was all about numbers. And the budget for the program was, it was several $100,000. And so it was basically communicated back is that I had no means of raising that money, and we were doing this, and it was like irresponsible. And so it was basically, I was told I can't do it. And this was shortly before kind of, we had reached a point where I was pretty sure things were, I was not going to be there that long anyhow. So, but if you look at the program, when I looked at that recently, some of the clips, it would have been fun.
Let's take a look now.
White people, any white people. White people, do you not have friends? This is the conversation. We're talking about skin. Skin, look, once you're on top.
Sam's class, 700 of us, one room.
Half of all revenues for cosmetic products in the world come from skin whitening cream. Slam dunk, white people. Slam dunk, we win.
It's funny, it's challenging, it's uncomfortable.
So you're gonna go to a sperm bank. You say, we got a guy for you, his name's Kiwan. Rock on, here's his sperm. You cool with having his sperm?
We talk about things that we never talk about, don't want to talk about, but we need to talk about.
I want you to pick out the darkest skin person.
Over there. I'm sorry.
Black, white, brown.
Politics.
Poverty, gender roles,
Culture.
religion.
Love.
Society, sexuality, everything.
And there was like this in
Took
the
over
class.
the room.
What was that?
There was an oh.
Can we,
Because
what
someone put
was
words
that?
to that.
We
Yeah,
pretend not to notice, and he's telling us to notice it.
After class, Laurie makes it personal. Our lives, our experience, what we think.
What do we think about that?
I have to admit, like, I felt less attractive in this culture.
To me, to see other Asian people is not American.
Sometimes we all agree on things. A lot of times we don't agree on anything.
And who did you envision?
I envisioned the white man.
A black person would display the same bias. Being pissed about it, like, I don't think that gets us anywhere.
We can't get to problems unless we see them. And we can't change until we face ourselves. What can't you say?
Sam Richards. I don't think I've ever seen a professor that took that kind of open approach in the way that he did.
No, you know, it's funny, like at KBDI, we would have been all over it, but it wouldn't have been a good production.
So
it was a great production, but yeah.
Yeah. So you mentioned liquid assets. That was about water, and water is an extremely important subject.
I think the average American family probably has a bit of difficulty visualizing all the assets that are under our feet.
We don't understand the value and the services that we use just for our personal needs.
We're talking about a commodity that's essential to life. I can't imagine a more important resource than water.
The water infrastructure is vital for disease protection, fire protection, basic sanitation, economic development, and for our quality of life.
And if the infrastructure is not there to actually deliver that water in the volume and the quality that's necessary, then communities simply can't exist.
Any other comments about this project?
No, that's on a much safer level than you can't say that, but it was a solid, it was a good program looking at water, again, with a lot of connections. I think the other thing that Melanie talked about some, and it was interesting with being a part of the editorial, chairing that effort, is that the funding mechanism was different on some of these. One is on geospatial, the other one that we did, and to some degree liquid assets, we were taking money from, it was really important that we couldn't have done it without money from parties that were interested in the subject matter, and yes, funding that would probably negate it from being aired nationally on PBS. And our audience was largely, online, although I think we had some stations that would pick it up as well. But we had to be very careful editorially that there was no interference in the editorial project. And this becomes even more important when you look at the world we're entering into, where you don't have FCC guidelines with online content. So you've got to have your own kind of way. It opens up doors for how you can do things, but you have to be very careful about that line. So that was the part that Melanie talked about quite well.
And let's listen to what she had to say about how you ended up dealing with this.
To deal with questions of how do we fund things and keep editorial control, but allow people who may have a dog in this fight contribute. Because if we, and I remember Elaine Brzezicki saying, and I just looked at her and thought that may be the most brilliant thing you've ever said, which she said, unless we figure out how to take money from organizations that care about a topic and still keep our editorial integrity, we will never make another movie. We will never make another documentary that is about anything but a cannon on a battlefield at sunset. Because there will be nothing we can do that will be that will be current. And it was I've used it so many times when I was trying to explain editorial integrity to Verizon, for example, and getting people to give us money with no editorial control, which is a feat. So
Ted, quite a career with KBDI and then the Penn State years. Any other comments that you want to make about your years at Penn State? Because a lot of really good things happened during those years.
No, I think if I were to pick a more different place to go to from KBDI, it would have been hard pressed to maybe, go from an urban area of a small kind of experimental station to an established traditional station at a university in a very rural part of the country. So I sometimes, I'm attracted sometimes by opposites, but it was, a fascinating experience. And I think overall a positive experience. I think obviously the last few years were challenging, but I had options, so it wasn't, I don't regret any of it. But it did make me wary, frankly. And when I look at the future of institutional licensees and how we're going to fare with that. But their potential is tremendous.
I was so spoiled by getting to work with you, Ted. I mean, it still is the best job I ever had. I mean, of my whole career, it was the best job I ever had. And I think that for me, that was because, there's a variety of reasons for that, but I mean, it was camaraderie, and we were actually getting to change things, and you gave us permission and encouragement and cheerleading to really take chances and to think differently, and gave us kind of a sandbox to do that was really meaningful. And we had sort of there was an actual commitment to mission that was we couldn't manage it forever because the politics were changing, but when that period of time was in place, that was all lined up, the potential, and to me what it showed in terms of, I mean, I still am so proud of this time because, to me it was about proving what a local public media entity could be to its community, what it could be in the 21st century. I mean, what it needs to become. And that's not a small thing. It's part of the fabric of our way of life that we could still play this integral role in civic discourse and storytelling and bringing people together. And, we were really charting a path to something new that was, to me, essential in our lives. And to get to do that with other people who were so excited about it and so committed to the vision of it, which it came from the top. I mean, I've learned this in my subsequent years, that the personality and the potential of any organization really is so embedded in the person who is leading it, that sensibility kind of creates the whole ethos, the vibe, what it's like to be there.